Hey, everybody. Welcome to Identity Radicals. I'm Mike Towers, Chief Security and Trust Officer at Vesa. And today I'm proud and privileged to be joined by Roland Cloutier, the currently has his own advisory company, but he's had a tremendous and impactful career as the former CISO at EMC, ADP, and TikTok. Roland, thanks so much for your time, and it's great to have you here.
Mike, always great to be chatting with you.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, let's today we're going to talk a little bit about machine identities, or sometimes they're called non-human identities. It's obviously a pretty big topic nowadays in the security space, and its evolving landscape. And obviously, we'll get into this a little bit later, but the rise of these concerns are confounded by, you can't have a security conversation nowadays without talking about AI, right? But let's start with the basics, Roland, if you wouldn't mind. Why do you think machine identity management has become so crucial in recent years?
Because it's the foundation of how our infrastructures, organizations, applications, products work, Mike. I mean, we've spent so much time as practitioners focused on who has access and applications and network and node defense. And we've built these incredible environments of microservices and data centers and API-enabled transferring architectures that have absolutely nothing to do with people or a human, and they all have identities in some way. And so we took this problem of privileged identity to the next level, only machine generated, and now we got a problem, right? Like,
Right.
we've done so much in the other direction for so long. We have a lot of catch up to do in this spot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think scale is a significant challenge as well. I mean, in many large organizations, machine identities, at least we've seen on the Vesa side, just basically looking at some of the anonymized data in our platform. But we published a state of access report recently that estimated that at least across our representative customer set, there's about 17-to-1 ratio of machine identities to human identities, which is a pretty staggering number. APIs, containers, service accounts, et cetera. And like I said before, now increasingly AI models are adding to that. How do you think this growth in the overall scale impacts security strategies?
That's my favorite question of the week, I think, Mike. I don't know if it changes the strategy or changes the attack path to solutions in the mission set. I think, I love scaring my peers by asking this question. Do you know every API in your environment, what it has access to, what it's supposed to do, how it authenticates, and what data is supposed to go over it? And then you watch, you ask that of me, and I'd get pretty pale.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it changes the priority of how we attack the problem. First of which I think is being able to instrument your protective ecosystem with transparency into those identities. It's not like you're going to be able to do anything about them overnight, because it's going to take engineering integration, product changes. It's going to take a lot to accomplish it, but just understanding it is a big jump. And then secondarily, how do we assess a capability that allows us to monitor it, right? Even before we get to prevention, right? Like transparency, monitor, okay, let's go do something on a priority basis. So again, it's prioritization rather than strategy, and enabling new technologies that have not been focused on this in the past.
Yeah, it's so much of this sounds like a science fiction novel or a book when you think
Wait a
about
minute, isn't that our life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's just crazy how many the rise of the machines type of thing and all that. It's just unbelievable how the world has changed. And, obviously things like IoTs are driving this up as well, and how they need to connect, because they're obviously corresponding to some sort of non-human identity that's being, so it's just crazy. And then as difficult as this was before, I mean, obviously I'd be surprised if you were at a company that wasn't being challenged to leverage AI in some way, shape, or form. And the training and usage of AI models is obviously an interesting new addition to this landscape. What do you think about AI models complicating the whole non-human identity space?
So I'm a little bit more hopeful there.
Yep.
To be pragmatic, the reality is that AI pipelines and integrated AI architectures predominantly use existing cloud infrastructure-like capabilities to be able to do their work. So the microservices, containers, so on and so forth. So I think we can get our control on the architecture that drives it. Model development management and access to data streams that support AI, and whether it's LLMs or traditional ML or whatever it may be, those are using APIs predominantly, right? So we can focus how they're using it and where they're using it through the enforcement of the identities associated with that. Now, where it gets complicated is data exchange, tokenization, validation, and things of the hard things, beyond the APIs. It's like, what data should they be accessing or not? What, who's using those tokens, why and how, and are they being replicated across dev and prod, and all those hard questions that we get to ask, and then regulators get to ask us in GCIFIs. But I'm seeing this clearly across, and I don't care if I'm working in technology, healthcare, social media, and or large GCIFIs. Everybody has kind of the same issue with regards to pipeline defense on AI. And the practicality of the matter, Mike, is that there's limited technology in AI pipeline defense, and
Yep.
so think about the concept of what is my AI, where is it being used, what's it built on. That's the hard part, because you ask any organization, they're going to say, yeah, we have 6 pipelines of AI that are in production, and then you go check their repos, and they've actually got like 105.
Right.
So how do you balance that out?
Yeah. It is the data piece, to your point, and what the access can or should be in terms of the AI algorithms, the training, the models, the APIs. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the old days. You and I have been doing this for a while, when we would build data warehouses, and you would have access to a data transaction system or high-level transaction system that was really, really well defined and well structured. But then as soon as you pulled the data out into some sort of warehouse for querying or business intelligence reporting or whatever, that it was all aggregated and lost. So it's a little bit analogous, obviously, at a much higher, more dynamic scale. So obviously AI gets a lot of attention, but can you think of any other trends or pushes other than AI that are contributing to the overall machine identity and non-human identity challenge?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, global organizations are still only 50 to 60% cloud transition enabled through the digitalization and transformation projects, right?
Yep.
We've been doing this 10 years, and we're at 50 to 60%. And so what you're seeing is the cost of cloud compute in comparison to enterprise compute come down. So you're seeing acceleration to that. The transformation of digital ecosystems, meaning, our value chain used to be really simple. We imagined something, we developed it, we built it, we marketed it, we sold it, we monetized it. And sometimes we had an outside CRM, we had an outside manufacturing provider, there were our third parties. Now we have third, fourth, fifth parties, and we're doing elements of a specific business process that's actually, a monetized component that's going out to a third party and being worked on by a fourth party. So the complication of our businesses that's now become a digital mesh between entities, and
Yep.
and where does our responsibility stop and start? Where does my accountability stop and start? What's even my capabilities? Right? Like, so these are all really complicated questions that's come up in the last 5 years. It's only being accelerated. And we see this obviously in major breaches in different industry. So we're going to have to face those. And that all comes as a part of how we're dealing with identity, access to appropriate business information, services, or capabilities that I'm supposed to be protecting, and how that integrates with my go-to-market.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And I think that the only other thing that I would add, or at least that I know that I've experienced myself and I've seen a lot of peers experience, and I only have to think, given everything that's happening and will happen, that will get even more challenging, is we'll talk a little bit later about what we as security leaders and what CISOs and their teams can do here. But from a business perspective, It's funny. Some, people will talk about how they may change organizational names, or there may be acronyms for the C-level title that changes. But regardless of the organizational side, the bottom line is that every business in every industry needs to be data and digitally enabled nowadays. So what happens is that the days of a quote unquote central IT organization doing all the technology are over. The business overall are becoming product owners, and there's digital and technology growth and output occurring in all parts of the business, or at least in most parts of the business. So taking such a complex area and broadening the fact that most of the business folks and folks outside of the technology, what we used to call the technology function, are driving a lot of these agendas, whether it's data generation, whether it's digital product development, et cetera, et cetera. It's all requiring a lot, whatever capabilities we need, no matter how new or what new capabilities they may require. It needs to be built from the ground up to recognize that there's going to be a lot more business involvement and non-technical involvement in driving some of these capabilities.
Yeah, you keep saying business, and it's why I've as I help a lot of our peers now, build the capabilities that they need moving forward. One of the things I strongly suggest is they stop calling themselves security organization,
Yeah.
right? They're business operations protection, executives, right? They're integrated part of the business that drives business context defense capabilities, but also enablement. I mean, think about the resiliency aspects of what chief security officers, chief information security officers, chief trust officers, and on have to do on a daily basis. But one thing is consistent. It doesn't matter if you operate at a centralized level, you're decentralized, you have shared services capability, name any model you want in the world that people use. The number one thing you have to have is transparency.
Yep.
If you cannot, and this is going back to my military days, calling me old, right? Like way back, right? This is you cannot protect what you can't see.
Yep.
And if you don't understand it or know it, there's no way you can defend it. So how do you get the level of transparency necessary across all of the things you just talked about, across data movement? Like, I mean, we could spend an entire hour on data defense and access assurance specific to data movement and the requirements. Like when I was at TikToks, I think some of the things that they did just so amazing, and the regulators really want to know about was, where's the data?
Yep.
Who has access to it? Where did it come from? Where did it go? I feel like I'm about to get into Cotton Eye Joe here, but that is what they wanted to know, right? The regulators and national security councils around the globe, and that's hard for organizations. But you can't do that unless you get your control on the identity. You can say Jimmy and Sally from country X and Y has access to that data that's stationed here, but are you giving them the whole picture? And regulators are catching on, right? They're saying, okay, that's great. You gave me the people names. What systems, technology, processes, or other applications or data stores have access to that data as well, right? And then you see people, go pale again. So these are all critical things. It all starts with a focus on the business outcomes, and your transparency to that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I was going to share a few thoughts on where I see building on the transparency notion. But before I get there, I'd love to hear everything you just mentioned. I'm 100% aligned with. But if you could talk a little bit about, or let's talk a little bit about translating some of that into maybe some practical advice, or what should CISOs and their teams be focusing on to get a handle on this? I know transparency and visibility is step one, but what other types of elements would you advise, or what do you think about?
I'm surprised you didn't say, I know what you're going to say, Roland, because we've known each other so long. But I think the first thing is like, understand your value chain, right?
Yep.
Get with your business. If you don't know how your company makes money, how the technology works, what technology is involved across the landscape of your product and your go-to-market, you're probably already starting up, downhill, and you got a boulder to push. So go figure that out, right? Number one thing is document the business, and not to say it's not going to change, and You're going to have to put some lifecycle management into this process, kind of like we do with BRP programs. But go figure it out. You can use it across your defensive management, your protective management, your response management, your BRP programs. Everybody can use it. It's an effort well used for sure. So
Yeah.
that's number one. I think number two is get the transparency. If you're still having arguments like, well, that's engineering, you're not allowed, that's dev, you don't need to see into that. Fight the good fight. The good fight is to give you transparency. You don't have to own everything to be able to do it well, to do your job well. You just need transparency and a voice in the process. So get that transparency you need. And I think third is get your arms around your controls. We all say, we do this, we do this, we do this, we have this. Okay. But is it done in that environment? I mean, Mike, you've been with me, right? Like, you're doing certification accreditation work and it's like, we have control X. And then you go, hey, we get that in the Philippines data center, right? Right? Like, do you? Get your arms around your controls. With truth is power. Even if it's not a great truth, you have an understanding what you have and don't have. If you start on those three basic things, you are way ahead of the game, and it will accelerate your capability to go solve these hard problems.
Yeah, it resonates so well, and I think couple of things come to mind is I know I spent a lot of time recently at a couple of my previous roles translating the security program into the protection and resilience of the value chain from a business perspective. And it was an interesting but a very, very worthwhile exercise, to your point. Obviously life sciences, where I spent a lot of time in, what are the threats to our ability to research and develop new drugs? What are our threats to manufacturing and getting drugs to patients and all that? Having the context of security in that regard and not just, a quote unquote traditional like framework, like a NIST or whatever, is a really, really impactful exercise to remind you why you're there, to your point, which is to enable the business. And the other thing that I think that I still surprised I hear, because I 100% agree with you about the transparency and getting and starting with knowing and getting the data, is how many security leaders and their teams are still concerned about having that visibility because they're worried that that's going to mean they're going to have too many issues to fix or whatever. And it's always better to know, in my opinion. And being able to at least have that data, understand what the truth looks like, because I can't imagine the alternative. So I think really, really powerful and pragmatic lessons there, and the approach that you outlined. Let's pivot a little bit to obviously one of the themes of this discussion, which is around identity and access. I've said pretty consistently and in public forums recently that the industry is full of great solutions that get you in the front door, but they have no idea what you could do once you're in the house or once you're in the hotel, once you're in the airplane, once you're whatever the analogy you want to use is. So entitlements and permissions are one of the most untapped capabilities we have in understanding that at scale. How do you think that factors into this whole element of non-human identities?
That's a deep question, man.
Yeah.
Just kidding. So I'm going to take it, and I'm not focusing on APIs for any reason other than for a lot of people listening, this is like really because they're on the dev side, or they're managing integrated access to product systems. It kind of goes back to the what, the who is important, right? The who or the what with regards to the identity, but what can they do, or what should they be able to do, and what are the controls we can put in place? If you don't take an entitlement view perspective of what something should be done, what's the difference of having allow or not? Because you're going to allow everything rather than allow what you've committed to or what that needs to happen. And whether you want to take that to an RBAC deep fine grain access control view, that's fine. But some of the basic things like, should I be able to move all of that data, right? Like, just because I have access, does that mean I can do a select all and move it to another repository? And that's a very high level, simple view.
Yep.
But entitlements is all about the what. And in organizations, in order to ensure speed to delivery within a digital ecosystem, has to apply the what, or they get into a massive gap that they cannot recover from. I mean, think about digital marketing, DMA type stuff, and how fast that stuff moves between organizational ecosystems. What if there are no control capabilities, or you don't apply entitlement, defense or controls? It's a disaster waiting to happen across hundreds of jurisdictions because they all apply it differently. So if you're going
Yeah,
to be in a digital business in a global environment that's regulated, I don't think you have a choice, Mike.
Great point. I think it's absolutely valid. And I think that, the whole element that we've been talking about here, just getting and maintaining that level of visibility and control. I mean, data used to be, and analytics used to be the way that we would do our reports to leadership, and now they're obviously so fundamental to the control because it's the only way you can make sense out of the data once you capture it. It's fundamental. We're getting a little bit close to the time here. I mean, this has been a great discussion. By the way, I'm going to have to. I often think about the silly things like movie quotes and sports, but now I'm going to start thinking about music because I can't believe we worked in Cotton Eye Joe to this discussion. But that's something we can talk about next time we see each other. A great analogy there. I wonder, Roland, if just based on this discussion, if there's any closing. We talked a lot about a delicate balance to strike here, and getting a lot of fine-grained control over what data and services your models are using, your APIs you're using, your non-human identities are using, et cetera. And of course, everybody's under a lot of pressure to securely enable the business at speed and at pace, because the speed expectations are way beyond anything that I think in the past that we were challenged with. Just wondering if you could think of any closing thoughts based on the discussion today.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to something you said that I thought was pretty important, and you kind of understated it when you're talking about some people just don't want to open that hole because they know the depths of the darkness. Your business is depending on you
Yep.
to open those holes. Your CEO is looking at you as an experienced business protection executive that is going to help them mitigate and migrate through these minefields, if you will. And if you don't have that visibility, if you're not willing to go that depth, you're not doing your business any service. And the closer as we become to business executives through our focus as business protection leaders, it's important that you do that. So all the things we've talked about, transparency and the technology and the things you should do first is all great, but do not hesitate to go down those deep, dark holes to shine a light on the things that the business needs to understand so you can bring practicality. You can translate what that means to business risk, and you can help them guide them, through their age of digitization and transformation. It's on you, and
Yep.
you've got to be up to the challenge.
No, outstanding advice. I couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, Roland, for sharing your advice, sharing your insights, taking the time. It's always great to talk to you, and really, really appreciate it.
All right, Mike, and I'm going to take you up on the next time. This will be a musical,
Yeah,
and
that's brilliant.
we'll figure out how to do it.
We'll work in movie quotes for it as well, and music quotes. That wraps up today's episode of Identity Radicals. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, in the world of identity, radical thinking leads to radical security. To see more Identity Radicals content, please subscribe to the Identity Radicals podcast on YouTube by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thanks, everybody, and talk to you soon.